For years, Russia was considered to have one of the most modern armies in the world, a claim that includes its aircraft. While the West has the F-22 and the F-35, and China has the J-20, Russia has the Su-57 Felon. On paper, it's a fifth-generation stealth fighter built on Soviet genius, forged from decades of aerospace mastery and a desire to surpass American designs. Moscow calls the Su-57 the crown jewel of the Russian Aerospace Forces. State media calls it revolutionary. One Russian general even claimed it was on the verge of becoming the world's first sixth-generation fighter jet. But that story is starting to look like it's full of holes, because the Su-57 is not a crown jewel, it's a carefully maintained illusion. And this is supported by actual statistics, data, and experiments, including those from the creator of the Su-57, the Russian aircraft manufacturer, Sukhoi's own patent filings. As it turns out, the Su-57 might be so overhyped that it sets a record for having the most misconceptions about its performance and capabilities. Today, we're going to tear that illusion apart. But before we get into the numbers, let's establish exactly what a fifth-generation fighter is supposed to be, and more importantly, how it differs from what came before it. Because to understand just how badly the Su-57 falls short, you need to understand the standard it's being judged against. Fourth-generation fighters are aircraft like the F-15, F-16, the MiG-29 and the Su-27. They're technically the pinnacle of Cold War aviation thinking, designed in the 1960s and 70s. They're fast, highly maneuverable, and capable of carrying a formidable array of weapons. During the Cold War, the principle for aircraft was that bigger is usually better, and that visible weapons could provide enough of an intimidation factor to try to pacify the opposition without actually using the expensive equipment. This is further complicated by the fact that radar and detection systems as a whole were very much in their infancy after the two world wars. The concept of radar cross-section was attractive, but it wasn't something that fighter jets actively prioritized. Instead, fourth-generation aircraft carry their missiles and bombs on external pylons, which are visible to radar and add to the overall signature of the aircraft. The radar systems themselves were based on different principles, arguably since we didn't know better technology at the time. So, a fourth-gen radar pinging outward would also be announcing its own location to anyone with the right equipment. And while these aircraft can be upgraded with better avionics, and even possibly fully digitalized systems and newer radar, they can't be fundamentally redesigned around stealth, because stealth was never baked into their airframe geometry from the start. That's the ceiling of the fourth generation aviation. You can paint a barn door with radar-absorbing material, but it's still a barn door. Now, the fifth generation changes the stealth game entirely. First up is a very low radar cross-section achieved through airframe shaping and materials from the start of the design stage. The aircraft has to look like almost nothing on radar from the moment the first blueprint is drawn. Secondly, most aircraft would have internal weapons bays, so that when the aircraft actually carries missiles and bombs into combat, that low radar signature is preserved. Third, an advanced ESA radar operating in low probability of intercept mode, meaning it can detect the enemy while minimizing its own radar emissions, functioning in short, frequency-hopping bursts that are extremely difficult to detect and track. Fourth, and arguably the most important, is the principle called sensor fusion, or the ability to pull data from multiple onboard and offboard sensors and present the pilot with a single, integrated, coherent picture of the battlefield, rather than forcing them to mentally reconcile readings from half a dozen separate displays. Finally, fifth-generation aircraft weren't designed to function alone. Their net-centric integration capabilities mean that they can share targeting data with one another, receive updates from other platforms, and operate as a communications and command node for other aircraft in the fleet. These 5 pillars – maneuverability, speed, awareness, advanced stealth, and connectivity – succinctly describe how 5th-gen aircraft made such shockwaves when they were introduced. And for the most part, the F-22 and the F-35 were designed to support all these pillars. But Russia's Su-57 doesn't actually fulfill most of the requirements that would make it worthy of being called a 5th-generation aircraft, let alone something more. To prove that, let's start with the stealth, which is arguably the defining characteristic of modern fighter and multi-purpose jets. It's here that the story surrounding the Su-57 begins to crumble. We don't need to rely on Western intelligence estimates or NATO assessments. We can use Sukhoi's own words. In patent filings submitted by the Sukhoi Design Bureau itself, the Su-57 is described as having a frontal radar cross-section of between 0.1 and 1 square meter. The Aviation Geek Club pointed out exactly what those numbers mean in practice. Some aviation experts claim the RCS range is comparable to a clean FA-18 Super Hornet or a Tomahawk cruise missile. Neither of those platforms has ever been marketed as a stealth aircraft. Boeing has never called the Super Hornet a fifth-generation stealth fighter, and yet that's the radar signature Russia's crown jewel is claiming. Now compare that to the F-35. The F-35 Lightning II has a frontal radar cross-section of approximately 0.001 to 0.005 square meters, roughly the size of a golf ball. The Su-57's own patent puts its signature at up to 1,000 times larger than that. Just let the scale of the difference set in for a moment. In a real engagement, the F-35's radar could detect the Su-57 at 6 to 10 times the range at which the Su-57 can detect the F-35. And in air combat, whoever sees the enemy first controls the engagement. Compared to the F-35, the Su-57 is pretty much flying blind into a fight it may not even know has started. And the exercises back this up. The US Air Force held premier combat training exercises, the Red Flag 17, running against the most sophisticated simulated opposition available. In these, the F-35 has recorded a kill ratio of 20-1 against modern fourth-generation fighters backed by AWACS support and surface-to-air missile systems. The Aviation Geek Club goes a step further and suggests a 28-1 kill ratio in favour of the F-35 against systems most closely similar to that of the Su-57. That's a terrible disadvantage to have when it takes 28 of your most advanced fighters to take out just one American analogue. Then there's a potential issue with the engine of the craft. The Su-57 jet currently uses the Saturn AL-41F1 afterburning turbofan, an engine essentially inherited from the Su-35 and never intended as a solution for the design. The intended power plant, the Izdelia 30 or AL-51F1, was supposed to provide genuine fifth-generation performance characteristics, reduce infrared signature, improve fuel efficiency for sustained supercruise, and the thrust margins needed for true maneuvering at those speeds. That engine has been in development for more than a decade and only entered flight testing in late 2017 after repeated delays. It's still not in mass production, meaning that Russia technically doesn't have a fifth-generation worthy engine to power its fleet. Aviation expert Valery Romanenko, speaking to the new Voice of Ukraine, identified another core deficiency in the Su-57's integration with command and control systems, suggesting it's nowhere near the level of Western fifth-generation platforms. The F-35 is essentially a flying sensor node, continuously sharing data across the battle space, feeding targeting information to other aircraft, ships and ground forces in real time. The Su-57's net-centric capabilities are significantly behind that standard. But the issue with the aircraft is not just about stealth design, connectivity, or its engine. As it turns out, the Su-57 might be so stealthy that Western media can't seem to find them anywhere in Russian air bases. And the reason for that is quite simple. There simply aren't that many Su-57s to begin with. To visualize how badly it really is for Russia, you need to hold one number in your head. Lockheed Martin alone delivered 191 F-35s in 2025. When counting all Western fighter programs, including the F-35s, F-16s, F-15EXs, Rafales, Typhoons or Gripens, the combined output in NATO is in the ballpark of 290 aircraft annually. But Russia's entire fighter-producing industrial base managed to deliver 33 aircraft in 2025, and that number counts all aircraft types, including Su-34s, Su-35s, Su-57s, and Su-30s. Rostec's own CEO called 2025 a record year. So, record-breaking output seems to be just a bit over 30 fighters per year. This can be easily explained once you realize the widespread structural and infrastructure problems that Russia has with its military-industrial complex. For example, the Komsomolsk-na-Amur plant in Russia's Far East is responsible for producing both the Su-35 and the Su-57 simultaneously. This means the factory's limited capacity is split between two programs competing for the same floor space, the same worker pool, and the same supply chain. Modernizing that factory alone is estimated to cost around €1 billion or $1.1 billion over 5 years, something that Russia isn't too keen on funding when it's barely winning a war in Ukraine for the previous 4 years. Even if Russia does fund the modernization, it's not clear exactly when the production can be sped up and by how much. Then there's the human capital bottleneck of aircraft production. Russia has already publicly complained that it was missing 400,000 technicians and engineers in the military-industrial complex. And that number is from all the way back in 2022, during the first few months of the invasion of Ukraine, and when Russia still had a relatively tame conscription rate and casualty rate in the war. Even if Russia manages to scrounge up enough skilled workers and engineers to build the airplanes, there are two more issues at play. First, Russia's civil aviation industry is facing a similar shortage, meaning that military and civilian aircraft manufacturers are fighting for the same pool of people. Worse yet, the civil airspace is in an even worse shape. In 2023, Russian officials announced that the country would deliver 1,000 commercial aircraft to Russian flight companies. As of late 2025, there have been barely a dozen of these aircraft built. That shortfall puts enormous pressure on the civil aircraft industry to the point where it's safe to assume they might be luring military engineers to their side. But secondly, and arguably more importantly, even if there's someone to make the plane, there might not be someone to fly it. According to an independent technical analysis, it takes roughly 3,000 hours of practice to train a technician on the advanced electronics and avionics systems the plane has. That type of training is almost impossible to conduct when the country is in an actual war. Russia needs to speed up that deployment if it ever hopes of flying more Su-57s in the first place. And the sanctions have compounded every one of these problems. Before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia relied heavily on Western-sourced avionics, microelectronics, and precision manufacturing equipment. Those supply chains are now severed. By 2023, approximately 90% of Russia's microelectronics were coming from China, but these components are not always equivalent to the Western parts they replace, which arrive through third-party channels at significantly inflated cost. The impact is visible in the fighter figures. Su-34 production rose from 9 aircraft in 2022 to 11 in 2023, against a 2025 target of 17. For Su-35s, Russia ordered 15 in 2024, but managed to deliver only 12. Compare that to the trajectory of Russian tank, drone, and artillery shell output, which has increased between 2 and 10-fold since the invasion. The contrast reveals something important. Mass-produced munitions and armored vehicles can be ramped up with existing Soviet legacy industrial infrastructure. Fighter jets can't be. They require precision components machined to narrow tolerances, and any disruption in the supply chain cascades through the entire assembly process. The situation becomes so dire that Russia reportedly attempted to buy back military-grade electronic components it had previously supplied to India and Myanmar. It would be stripping parts from export deliveries to feed its own domestic production lines. That's basically cannibalizing its own international relationships to stay afloat. And through all of this, the Su-57 actually receives whatever scraps are left after the Su-34 and Su-35 lines take their share. In 2025, that amounted to 2 Su-57 deliveries to the Russian Air Force for the entire year. But before we go further, make sure you're subscribed to The Military Show. We post news and detailed analytics every day so you can stay informed. Now back to the Su-57. Beyond supply chain and stealth issues, there's one possible problem that Russia might not be able to overcome. There's no one to buy the plane and allow Russia to profit by selling more. This also harkens back to the war in Ukraine, but its roots go much deeper. For decades, Russian arms exports were a geopolitical anchor that separated the West from the East, the capitalists from the socialist worlds. Countries like India, Egypt, Algeria, and Vietnam built their entire air forces around Russian hardware. Russia was their supplier, their maintenance partner, their upgrade pathway. And those relationships are collapsing. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Russian arms exports fell by 53% between the 5-year periods of 2014 to 2018 and 2019 to 2023. In 2019, Russia was exporting major arms to 31 countries. By 2023, that number had fallen to 12. The individual country figures are more damaging still. Russian exports to India fell 34%, to Egypt by 54%, to Vietnam by an extraordinary 91%. These numbers are more than just Western sanctions pressure. The potential customers see that Russia is barely making progress in the war it started and is hesitant to buy that same, or in most cases worse, equipment, as most export versions are relatively weaker than their domestic counterparts to maintain military secrets. But it's the two big players that are Russia's issue now. India and China together accounted for 55% of Russian arms exports between 2020 and 2024. Both are now looking elsewhere. India has cancelled procurement, delayed payments, and is actively planning to upgrade its existing Russian-built aircraft without Russian participation, effectively cutting Moscow out of the maintenance and upgrade revenue stream entirely. The shift has left an opening for a new supplier. China has moved in to fill the gap that Russia is leaving behind, offering cheaper platforms, minimal political conditions, and attractive trade packages. Beijing is aggressively filling the market that Russia is abandoning. The JF-17 Thunder, developed jointly with Pakistan, has found buyers across the developing world. The J-10C is drawing serious interest from countries that would previously have defaulted to a Russian option. And the dynamic is being reinforced by the Ukraine war itself, where the limitations of Russian air power have been broadcast to every country on Earth in real time. Countries that once tolerated Russian delivery delays and capability shortfalls because there was no viable alternative are now discovering there are alternatives, and China is making sure they know it. With this in line, the Su-57 export program was essentially finished before it started. Algeria received 2 jets against an order of 14. India withdrew from the Joint Development Initiative in 2018, citing cost and capability concerns. But what about Ukraine? Surely on the actual front line, the Su-57s are making their presence known as the most advanced and formidable pieces of Russia's air fleet. But in fact, the actual response has been lukewarm at best. By most counts from military analysts across the world, Russia failed to achieve air superiority over Ukraine, a task that should be laughable when the enemy is using the same planes as you, just a generation older and in a poorer state. Ukraine even sold back some of its aircraft to Russia to settle some of its energy debts back in 1999. No, the Su-57 has been notably absent from meaningful operations over contested airspace. Former EA-18 Growler pilot Adam Daymood pointed to the Israeli strikes on Iranian air defences. These were conducted by F-35Is over the course of a couple of days, with Israeli aircraft returning barely scratched. They served as the template for what true stealth-enabled air power looks like in practice. According to him, NATO could conduct those same missions against Russian air defences, and follow-on flights would face no meaningful opposition. But Russia can't do that in Ukraine, a country that has a fraction of NATO's budget and anti-air capabilities, and its supposed 5th-generation flagship has spent much of the war launching cruise missiles and dumb glide bombs from deep within Russian airspace, rather than contesting the skies over the front line. And through all of this, Moscow keeps spinning. UAC, Russia's state aviation agency, and TASS reported that an upgraded Su-57 could become the world's first 6th-generation aircraft in service. Viktor Bondarev, former commander of the Russian Aerospace Forces and now chairman of the Federation Council's Defense and Security Committee, went on record calling it the best in terms of stealth characteristics, incorporating all the best that's available in modern aviation science. This is a man describing an aircraft whose own manufacturer's patent confirms it has the radar cross-section of a cruise missile. This just goes to show how deep-reaching Russian propaganda is when they decide to rebrand what's essentially a 4th-generation fighter jet into a future-proof 6th-generation fighter, something that even the US hasn't actually built yet. So no, the Su-57 Felon is not a crown jewel. It's a symbol of what happens when a military-industrial complex built on Cold War foundations tries to compete with 21st century Western aerospace engineering while simultaneously absorbing the shock of sanctions, depleted manufacturing capacity, and a war of attrition that's consuming resources it can't replace. Russia has fewer than 35 operational Su-57s after years of production. Its one export customer received only 2 jets in a few years. Its engines are a decade behind schedule. Its stealth performance is documented as 1,000 times worse than the aircraft it was supposed to compete with. Earlier buyers are walking away, and China is already luring them in. But the Su-57 is just the start of Russia's Air Force breakdown. To learn more about it, check out this video and make sure you're subscribed to The Military Show for more daily news on all topics in global warfare and geopolitics.